The Winchesters' report cracked through the schoolhouse like thunder, echoing off the walls as cordite smoke billowed from its barrel. Ethan Crawford stood in the doorway, legs braced wide, his face weathered granite beneath his Stetson. His rifle remained leveled at the three men who'd cornered Rebecca Morgan and a dozen terrified children against the far wall, their small faces white with fear, some openly sobbing. "Next bullet goes between your eyes, Miller," Ethan said, his voice cold as a mountain stream as he smoothly chambered another round. "I can drill a coyote at 400 yards. From here, I can't miss." Jack Miller's gun hand trembled slightly, his sneer faltering beneath his waxed mustache. Blood from a shallow graze colored his cheek where Ethan's warning shot had nicked him. His expensive suit couldn't hide the yellow streak running down his back. "Your fancy railroad friends can't help you here," Ethan continued, eyes unblinking. "Drop your weapons and get out of my daughter's school, or I'll drop you where you stand." Miller's hand twitched toward his holster, and Ethan's finger tightened imperceptibly on the trigger. The standoff stretched 5 heartbeats before Miller nodded to his men. "This ain't over, Crawford." Miller spat blood onto the schoolhouse floor. A crimson stain spread across the clean pine boards where children learned their letters. "It is for today," Ethan replied, his Colt peacemaker now drawn with his left hand, covering all three men. They backed toward the door, spurs jingling against wood. Only when they'd mounted and disappeared down the road did Ethan lower his weapons. Small fingers tugged at his coat. Ethan turned to find Lily, his 4-year-old daughter, blue eyes wide in a face framed by golden curls. Though fear lingered in her gaze, something else shone through. The absolute certainty that her father would protect her. It was the closest thing to communication they'd shared in months, not since the fever took her hearing last winter. But this confrontation wasn't where their story began. It had started 6 months earlier in the bitter cold of Shadow Creek, Wyoming territory, 1881. Dawn broke over the Bighorn Mountains, painting them gold against a cobalt sky. Ethan Crawford watched from his porch, the steam of his coffee mingling with his breath in the frigid air. At 42, lines etched his face like a topographic map, each one earned through struggle, loss, and stubborn determination. The Crawford Ranch spread before him, 3,000 acres of Wyoming's finest grazing land that he'd built from nothing after the war between the states. His Remington rolling block rifle leaned against the porch rail, always within reach. Not from paranoia, but prairie practicality. Inside the ranch house, he heard plates clattering as Maria, the Mexican housekeeper, prepared breakfast. But he knew his daughter wouldn't eat. Since losing her hearing to scarlet fever, little Lily had retreated into silence, food untouched, toys forgotten. The vibrant child who once sang to the horses was gone, replaced by a silent ghost who flinched at shadows she couldn't hear. "She needs her mama," Ethan whispered. But Sarah was gone, claimed by the same merciless winter that later stole his daughter's hearing. Grief had hollowed him, leaving a hardened shell that could run a ranch and face down rustlers, but couldn't reach his own child. The crunch of boots on frosted ground announced Thomas Blackwood, his foreman and oldest friend. A former Union Army scout during the war, Thomas stood tall and proud despite the prejudice he faced in town. On the Crawford Ranch, he was respected for his skill with horses, his deadly accuracy with a Henry rifle, and his unfailing loyalty. "Mail rider came through early," Thomas said, handing over an envelope. "Sheriff Hobson says there's a new school teacher in town. Thought you might want to know." Ethan looked up sharply. "What's special about another school teacher?" "This one knows hand-talking, sign language for folks who can't hear." Ethan's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "Hand language? That's what the sheriff said. She taught deaf children back east at some special school. Name's Rebecca Morgan." Thomas paused, watching hope flicker across Ethan's face. She's staying at Widow Peterson's boarding house. Arrived on yesterday's stage. Thomas, watch the ranch, Ethan said, already striding toward the stable. I'm riding to town. Shadow Creek had transformed since the railroad survey crews first staked their claim 5 years earlier. What had been a sleepy trading post was now a growing frontier town. A general store, two saloons, a blacksmith, and the newly constructed schoolhouse standing proudly at the edge of town. The discovery of gold in the northern hills had brought prospectors, gamblers, and opportunists of every stripe. It had also brought Jack Miller and his crew of hired guns, working for the Northern Pacific Railroad, pressuring ranchers to sell land cheap for the coming rail line. Ethan dismounted outside the schoolhouse, his well-oiled Colt Peacemaker hanging comfortably at his hip. The Remington rifle remained in its scabbard, a precaution he learned never to neglect. Inside, children ranging from 6 to 12 sat at simple desks, while at the front stood a woman unlike any school teacher Ethan had encountered before. Rebecca Morgan was younger than expected, perhaps 28, with auburn hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. Though slight of build, there was steel in her posture. When she spoke, her voice emerged barely above a whisper, raspy and strained. But her hands danced gracefully, forming shapes and gestures that somehow seemed more eloquent than words. "Good morning," she signed and whispered simultaneously. "Today we learn the numbers and animals." Ethan removed his hat. Rebecca turned, her clear green eyes meeting his without wavering. "Mr. Crawford," she said softly, recognizing him immediately. In Shadow Creek, everyone knew the cattle baron by reputation. "Miss Morgan," Ethan nodded, "I heard you know a special way to talk with those who can't hear." "Sign language," she confirmed, her hands automatically forming the words. "I learned at the Hartford Asylum for the Deaf and Dumb after my accident." "My daughter," Ethan began, his voice catching. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to continue. "Lily lost her hearing last winter. Fever. She's 4 now and she's slipping away from me." The vulnerability in those last words surprised even him. Ethan Crawford didn't admit weakness, not to anyone. Yet something about Rebecca Morgan's quiet dignity invited truth. Understanding softened her expression. "Bring her tomorrow. I'll teach her." The schoolhouse door crashed open. Jack Miller strode in, flanked by 2 gunmen whose hands hovered near their holsters. At 35, Miller had the look of a man accustomed to intimidation. Custom-tailored clothes from Chicago that couldn't disguise the predator beneath. A jagged scar ran from his right eye to jawline, evidence of a knife fight he'd clearly survived. "Well now," Miller drawled, thumbs hooked in an ornate belt. "The mighty cattle king visiting our new schoolmarm. How touching." "This is a classroom, Mr. Miller," Rebecca said, her voice quiet but firm as she stepped protectively in front of her students. Miller's cold eyes dismissed her, focusing on Ethan. "Railroad's offering double the going rate for that north pasture of yours, Crawford. Even a stubborn mule like you should recognize a generous offer." "My land's not for sale," Ethan replied evenly, though his hand had shifted imperceptibly closer to his holster. "Not at any price." Miller's gaze slid to Rebecca, something predatory in his assessment. "As for you, Miss Morgan, Shadow Creek isn't the place for your peculiarities. We don't need outsiders bringing strange notions, especially crippled ones." Ethan stepped between them, his movement fluid, but unmistakably threatening. "She stays." The tension crackled between them until Miller's lips curved into something resembling a smile. "This is our town now, Crawford. Your deaf brat might need a special teacher, but not here. Consider that friendly advice from the railroad." After Miller and his men departed, Rebecca gathered her composure. "Who was that man?" "Jack Miller. Claims to work for the railroad as their negotiator. Been forcing folks off their land for months. Some say he killed 3 men in Montana before coming here. Ethan settled his hat back on his head. I'll escort you home, Miss Morgan. Shadow Creek isn't always welcoming to strangers. As they walked toward the boarding house, Ethan added quietly, I'll bring Lily tomorrow. If anyone can help her, I will try. Rebecca signed the words as she spoke. Every child deserves a voice, Mr. Crawford, even if it's one they speak with their hands. The first time Lily met Rebecca, the child clung to Ethan's leg, eyes wide with apprehension. Ethan knelt beside her, uncertain how to explain when words meant nothing to her now. Rebecca approached slowly, then knelt to Lily's eye level. Instead of speaking, she simply raised her hands and signed, Hello, Lily. I'm happy to meet you. The girl's eyes widened in shock, then wonder. By noon, Lily had learned to sign father, horse, and happy. When she formed the word happy with her small hands and looked up at Ethan with the first genuine smile in months, he had to turn away, blinking rapidly. You've given her back her voice, he said hoarsely to Rebecca when Lily was occupied with wooden blocks. No, Rebecca whispered, her hands moving simultaneously. I've only shown her that she still has one. Each morning, Ethan rode to town with Lily perched before him in the saddle. Each evening, he returned with a daughter who seemed more present, more alive. Within weeks, Lily was signing constantly, her small hands fluttering with excitement. Back at the ranch, Thomas oversaw preparations for the spring cattle drive while training the hands to shoot straighter and faster. Miller's been asking questions about our water rights, Thomas told Ethan one evening as they cleaned their rifles. His men have been seen mapping the creek that runs through your north section. The railroad wants more than pasture now, Ethan replied, working oil into his Remington's action. They want the whole valley. Thomas nodded toward town. The teacher's been good for Lily. She has. Ethan didn't elaborate, but his thoughts lingered on Rebecca. Her quiet courage, her patience with Lily, the grace of her hands as they shaped words from silence. In town, whispers spread like prairie fire. Ethan often watched the schoolhouse from a distance, seeing how Rebecca had begun teaching all the children basic signs. Soon the entire class could sign, Good morning, Lily, each day, making the girl beam with delight. But not everyone approved. Crawford's paying her special to teach that deaf girl of his, Mrs. Hollister muttered in the general store. Ain't natural talking with hands. And have you noticed how she barely speaks? Another woman added. Something wrong with her, too. Birds of a feather, I suppose. The rumors reached Widow Peterson, who confronted Rebecca one evening. I can't have your kind of trouble here, Miss Morgan. Mr. Miller and his associates made it clear. You have until Saturday to find other lodging. That Friday, Ethan arrived at the schoolhouse to find Rebecca gathering her few possessions, her movements betraying barely controlled distress. You're leaving? He asked, dread settling in his stomach. I have no choice, she whispered, hands trembling. Mrs. Peterson has evicted me, and no one else will rent to me. Miller's men have been persuasive. Ethan watched Lily arranging wooden letters across the room, oblivious to the adult conversation. Come to the ranch, he said abruptly. Rebecca looked up, startled. The foreman's cabin is vacant since Thomas moved to the bunkhouse. It's small but proper, with its own garden plot. Seeing her hesitation, he added, The ranch has 15 armed men. Miller and his thugs won't set foot there. People will talk, Rebecca signed as she spoke. Let them, Ethan replied, jaw set. I'd rather face wagging tongues than watch my daughter retreat back into silence. That evening, Rebecca settled into the small cabin near the main house. Built of solid pine logs with a stone fireplace in a covered porch, it overlooked the vast Crawford Ranch, the sprawling main house with its distinctive red roof, the bunkhouse where the hands stayed, the massive barns and corrals, and beyond, hundreds of cattle grazing under the vast Wyoming sky. As darkness fell, Thomas positioned men strategically around the property. "Miller's been drinking heavy at the Silver Dollar all day," he reported, checking the loads in his Henry rifle. "Word is he's making threats. I've doubled the night watch." "Good," Ethan replied, sliding his Remington from its scabbard. "Because I don't think he's the type to quit easily." The attack came at midnight. 3 riders approached from the east, using the new moon's darkness for cover. They might have succeeded if Thomas hadn't positioned Jeff Rollins, an ex-Army scout with exceptional night vision, in the old oak overlooking that approach. The warning shot split the night. "Riders coming in fast, armed!" Ethan was out of bed and reaching for his rifle before the echo faded. From his window, he saw shadows moving toward the barn. "They're trying to fire the place," Thomas shouted, already returning fire from behind the water trough. Gunfire erupted across the yard. Ethan took careful aim through his rifle's peep sight and squeezed the trigger. One of the intruders screamed, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from the saddle. His companions dragged him to his horse before galloping away into the darkness. "Don't pursue," Ethan ordered as several hands prepared to mount. "It could be a trap to draw us out." In the aftermath, Ethan and Thomas examined what the wounded man had dropped: a detailed map of the Crawford Ranch with water sources marked, bearing the Northern Pacific Railroad Company seal in one corner. Notes in the margin detailed the ranch's defenses and routines. "This wasn't just Miller," Thomas said grimly. "They've been watching us for weeks." "Or Miller's getting desperate," Ethan replied, studying bloodstains on the ground. "From the blood trail, I hit him high in the shoulder. He'll need a doctor." Inside the main house, Ethan found Rebecca comforting a frightened Lily in the parlor. The girl ran to her father, and he lifted her into his arms. "We're safe," he signed clumsily, using the signs he'd begun to learn. Rebecca watched him, then approached. "Would you like to learn more?" she asked softly. "For Lily?" Over the following days, between managing the ranch and strengthening defenses, Ethan dedicated himself to learning sign language. His large, calloused hands, more accustomed to reins and rifle, struggled with the delicate movements. But when he successfully signed "I love you" to Lily for the first time, her delighted laughter was worth every frustration. One evening, as they sat on Rebecca's porch while Lily slept inside, Ethan asked, "How did you learn to sign? Were you born—" He gestured awkwardly to his throat. Rebecca shook her head and wrote in her notebook, "A stagecoach accident when I was 8. My parents were killed instantly. A broken axle pierced my throat, damaging my vocal cords. The sisters at St. Mary's Orphanage sent me to the Hartford Asylum, though I could hear perfectly well. It was there I learned to sign and became a teacher," Ethan said, studying her in the lamplight. She nodded, writing, "The sisters said a woman with a broken voice would never find a husband or proper place. Teaching was my only option." She paused, then added firmly, "But I've never regretted it. Every child deserves a voice." "You're braver than most men I know, Rebecca Morgan," Ethan said quietly. Color touched her cheeks at the use of her first name, but before she could respond, Thomas approached from the bunkhouse, his expression grave. "Doc Wilkins just rode in," he reported. "Says Miller's gathering men in town, professional gun hands from Cheyenne. And there's something else." He hesitated. "Miller's brother William arrived on today's stage from Montana. He's wanted for murder in 3 territories." Ethan's expression hardened. "This isn't about forcing out a school teacher anymore. They want the whole ranch." The schoolhouse fire started during noon recess. Rebecca had taken the children outside to practice their letters in the spring sunshine when 12-year-old James Potter shouted, pointing to smoke pouring from the schoolhouse windows. Rebecca counted heads frantically. "The Barton boys," she gasped. "They stayed inside to clean the blackboards." Without hesitation, she rushed toward the burning building. The heat hit her like a physical blow as she entered, smoke immediately assaulting her fragile lungs. Crouching low, she pushed deeper into the inferno. She found the Barton boys coughing near the back, disoriented by the thickening smoke. As she guided them toward the exit, she turned to see Lily, who had followed her in, frozen with terror before the advancing flames. With no time to think, Rebecca lunged toward the child, shielding her as a burning beam crashed down. Searing pain exploded through her right arm as she pushed Lily toward the door. The girl ran, but Rebecca collapsed, the smoke overwhelming her damaged lungs. Ethan had been at the general store when someone shouted about the fire. He vaulted onto his horse and galloped toward the billowing black smoke, heart hammering against his ribs. By the time he arrived, the schoolhouse was an inferno. Children huddled across the street while townspeople formed a futile bucket line. "Lily!" he shouted, scanning the crowd frantically. Relief crashed through him when he spotted her safe with Mrs. Hobson. Then terror struck anew. "Where's Miss Morgan?" he demanded. "Still inside," gasped young James, face streaked with soot. "She saved the Barton boys, but went back for Lily. The roof?" Ethan didn't wait. Tying his bandana over his nose and mouth, he charged through the doorway into hell itself. The heat slammed into him like a physical blow. Flames devoured the walls and crawled across the ceiling, and black smoke churned overhead. Staying low, Ethan moved deeper into the burning building, tracking Rebecca's path by the disturbed debris on the floor. He found her near the back, unconscious, her right arm and side badly burned. Without hesitation, he lifted her and staggered toward the exit as the roof began to give way behind them. They emerged into daylight seconds before the entire structure collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. Ethan laid Rebecca gently on the grass, checking for breath. "Get Doc Wilkins," he shouted to the gathering crowd. Lily broke free from Mrs. Hobson and ran to Rebecca's side, tears streaming down her face as she signed frantically, "Wake up! Wake up!" Doc Wilkins arrived minutes later, his weathered face grim as he examined Rebecca's burns. "The arm's bad," he muttered. "And her lungs?" He shook his head. "Get her to my office, now." Later, as Rebecca lay bandaged and sedated in the doctor's back room, Ethan examined what remained of the schoolhouse. Among the charred timbers, Thomas found a distinctive silver spur with an unusual rowel, identical to one Miller had been wearing in the saloon the previous night. "This wasn't an accident," Thomas said quietly. Ethan's face hardened, grief hardening into cold fury. "No, it was a message, and I aimed to answer it." That night, Rebecca regained consciousness in Doc Wilkins' office, her arm bandaged from fingertips to shoulder. The pain in her eyes went beyond physical when she realized she could no longer form the signs that had become her voice and livelihood. Lily refused to leave her side, but the girl's distress only grew as she realized Rebecca couldn't sign back to her. For the first time since learning to sign, Lily withdrew again into silence. Back at the ranch, Ethan paced his study until Thomas entered with a worn leather-bound book. "Found this in Miss Morgan's cabin," Thomas said, placing a sign language primer on the desk. "Thought you might need it." Through the night, Ethan and Thomas studied by lamplight, practicing the motions until their hands cramped. By dawn, Ethan had memorized dozens of essential signs. When he visited Rebecca the next morning, he found her awake but despondent, her bandaged hands resting uselessly in her lap. Lily sat beside her, silent tears on her cheeks. Ethan knelt before them both. Slowly, carefully, he signed, "Don't give up." Rebecca's eyes widened. "I'll be your hands," Ethan continued, his signs clumsy but clear, "until yours heal." Lily looked from her father to Rebecca, then tentatively signed, "Family helps family." For the first time since the fire, Rebecca smiled through her tears. That afternoon, Ethan confronted Sheriff Hobson in his office, slapping the silver spur onto his desk. "Miller set that fire. I want him arrested." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Can't arrest a man on just a spur, Crawford. I have witnesses who saw him near the school before the fire," Ethan pressed. "And this." He tossed down a charred fragment of cloth with the railroad company's emblem. "Even if I wanted to," Hobson replied. "Miller's got 20 men now. I've got me and one deputy." "Then deputize more," Ethan said, leaning across the desk. "The ranchers are with me. This isn't just about a school teacher anymore. It's about who runs Shadow Creek, the people or railroad thugs." As he left the sheriff's office, Ethan noticed fresh wanted posters on the wall. One caught his eye: a reward for William Miller, wanted for 3 murders in Montana Territory. The sketch showed a man who resembled Jack, but with colder, deader eyes and a distinctive X-shaped scar on his right hand. Another piece fell into place. 3 days later, Rebecca was strong enough to be moved to the Crawford Ranch. Though her burns were healing, Doc Wilkins warned it might be months before she regained full use of her hands, if ever. Ethan converted his study into a schoolroom where Rebecca could continue teaching Lily, with Ethan serving as her hands, signing what she instructed. Several families from town, disgusted by the attack on the schoolhouse, began bringing their children to the ranch for lessons. Miller's response was swift. Crawford's harboring that crippled teacher and turning his ranch into a fortress, he told anyone who would listen in the saloon. "What's he hiding out there? I say we remind him who runs this town." Sheriff Hobson, caught between duty and self-preservation, sent a messenger to the ranch. "Miller's planning something big. Got 20 men now, including his brother William. They've been practicing fast draws behind the slaughterhouse." Ethan gathered the neighboring ranchers, men who had their own reasons to fear the railroad's expansion. By nightfall, the Crawford Ranch housed 30 armed men positioned strategically around the property. "If they come," Ethan told them, "we defend our own. But we don't shoot first. We're lawmen, not murderers." But Miller didn't attack the ranch. Instead, he struck where they least expected. The temporary schoolhouse, a large tent set up at the edge of town, was filled with children when Miller and 5 men rode up the following morning. Rebecca had resumed teaching, though Ethan still served as her hands, signing her instructions to the children. Miller dismounted, followed by a taller man with dead eyes and an X-shaped scar on his right hand. William Miller's reputation had preceded him, a man who'd killed for pleasure in 3 territories before finding legitimate employment with the railroad. "School's over," Jack Miller announced, pushing into the tent. "Permanently." Ethan stepped between Miller and the children. "Take your men and leave. These are just children." "And that's just a crippled schoolmarm who should have left when told," William Miller said, his voice oddly soft as he drew his pistol. "This is your last warning, Crawford." What happened next unfolded in heartbeats that seemed to stretch into hours. William aimed at Rebecca. Ethan's Winchester cracked, the bullet tearing through the canvas behind Miller as a warning. The children screamed. Jack Miller drew, but Ethan was faster, his second shot striking Miller's shoulder, spinning him around. "Get the children out!" Ethan shouted to Rebecca as he overturned a heavy oak table for cover, pushing her and Lily behind it. Gunfire erupted. Outside, horses thundered toward them, Thomas and the ranch hands responding to the shots. "This is our last stand for Shadow Creek," Thomas shouted as he dismounted, rifle at the ready. The battle was brief but fierce. Miller's men, caught between Ethan inside and Thomas's approaching riders, scattered into town. William Miller put a bullet through Thomas's hat before fleeing himself. Jack Miller tried to follow but collapsed from blood loss. As the smoke cleared, Ethan stood over the wounded man, Winchester trained on his chest. "It's over, Jack." Sheriff Hobson finally arrived with a posse of townsmen in Miller's saddlebags. They discovered documents proving he'd been working for the railroad to intimidate landowners, and authorization to use any means necessary to secure the Crawford Ranch. "This'll hang you," the sheriff said grimly, examining the papers. "My brother will kill you all," Miller spat as they loaded him into a wagon bound for the territorial prison. 1 month later, Shadow Creek celebrated its spring festival. The new schoolhouse stood larger and sturdier than before, built with donations from every ranch in the county. Rebecca, her arms healing better than expected, watched from the doorway as children played in the yard. Ethan stood beside her, Lily perched on his shoulders. Town council meeting went well, he said. They voted to formally request a railroad station, on our terms, not theirs. And they've appointed a new sheriff. Thomas, Rebecca asked, her voice soft but steadier. Ethan nodded. First black sheriff in Wyoming territory. Some folks didn't like it, but most remember who stood with us when it mattered. As the sun began to set, Ethan addressed the gathered townspeople. His speech was brief, but his words carried across the hushed crowd. Sometimes the strongest voice isn't the loudest, he said, then continued with both voice and signs. Sometimes it comes from hands and hearts willing to stand up for what's right. He turned to Rebecca, who stood with Lily at her side. Miss Morgan came here to teach our children to speak with their hands. She taught us all to stand together. As lanterns were lit around the square, Ethan, Rebecca, and Lily stood beneath the old oak tree. Their hands moved in perfect unison, signing words only they could see but that everyone understood. Family. Forever. Love. From the shadows across the street, a figure watched. William Miller, his dead eyes cold as he counted the armed men still guarding the Crawford family. His ex-scarred hand strayed to his Colt Navy as he backed away into darkness. His brother's debt would be paid, but not tonight. He had time and 12 gun hands waiting outside town. Crawford would face reckoning, but first he needed a plan. If this story of courage, family, and standing up for what's right in the Old West touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more authentic tales from America's frontier. Until next time, this is Wild West Stories, bringing you the legends that built a nation.